Welcome in Barcelona. 10 years ago, with Bruno Velas, we have organized the first clinical trial in Alzheimer's disease in Montpellier. The principal aim of this meeting was to put together researchers from academic origin and industry in order to have a lot of exchanges, and all the time this was the principal goal of the CTAD. And in 2008, some of us were already present, like Michael, like Lon Schneider, like Karl Blenoff, like Jakob Stern. So a lot were already present. And they are still present. We hope, because I think the research we will build, we hope that in 30 years we will be there again, still. So the aim of that kind of meeting was to take together industry and academy. And perhaps Rachelle Doody is a sort of symbol of this association of academy and industry. She was brilliant in Houston as a researcher, a clinical researcher, and she is brilliant in Bâle as a leader in industry. So, thank you, Rachelle, and I just pull the microphone to Michael.
Thank you, Jacques. First of all, we have to all congratulate Bruno Velas and Jacques Touchon for having the vision to create CTAD a decade ago. The meeting has grown. It's a fantastic meeting. I'm privileged to help organize the meeting, and thank you all very much for coming. I'd now like to introduce Jose Luis Molinuevo, who is director of the Barcelona Beta Brain Research Center, representing Barcelona.
Thank you, Mike. Does it work? Okay, thank you, Mike. Well, I think it's a pleasure for us to have CTAD in Barcelona. It's the second time. I believe the first time was extremely successful. I see many of our colleagues and friends very happy to be back here. So we are really happy for that. But we are also happy because Barcelona is becoming a real hub center in Alzheimer's disease research. As you are well aware, Mercè Center, Fundación ACE, Hospital Clinic, Sant Pau, our Barcelona Beta Brain Research Center, we are doing a lot of things trying to move the field forward. We are extremely complementary, so we look forward working with all of you, and welcome again to Barcelona. Thank you. And I give the word to Mercè.
Okay, thank you. And welcome to Catalonia, welcome to Barcelona, my city, your city. As the previous José Luis Molinuevo told, Barcelona is a relevant place for Alzheimer's disease. It's a hub for experience in research, in clinic, in epidemiological, and also is a host the most important events devoted in Alzheimer's disease. I trust, I hope that CTAD provides us information, innovative approach, and positive results. Welcome.
So, Paul, the floor is yours now.
Well, it is my very great pleasure and honor to announce the recipient of this year's CTAD Lifetime Achievement Award, Rachelle Doody. Rachelle has been an outstanding member of the AD therapeutic development community from the beginning of the field. As a clinical neurologist and leader of the center at Baylor, she has contributed an enormous body of work on the description of the AD phenotype and the longitudinal course and prediction of that course. She has been a vibrant and articulate member of the academic community, the ADCS and ATRI. She has been a leader of many industry clinical trials and the analysis of many industry data sets from cholinesterase inhibitors, mitochondrial protectants, gamma secretase inhibitors, AD immunotherapy. Her contributions have been enormous. It is with some regret that I mention that Rachelle has left academia for industry. It's obviously terrific for Roche and terrific for the field, and we just have to make sure that Rachelle's involvement with the academic community continues. But it's just a pleasure to be able to make this award to Rachelle Doody. Rachelle.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all of you for being here. I think that when something like this happens, it's the first time for me, but I've watched other people. I think you first are extremely surprised. I ran into Bruno in an empty hallway at AAIC the first day of the meeting, the very first person I saw, and he said, "Oh, the CTAD committee is going to give you a Lifetime Achievement Award." And it was a completely unreal, surreal situation. So your surprise is replaced with happiness and then gratitude toward these people who shape the field, shape the conventions, shape the thought, and have done so much themselves. And then you ask, but what does it mean to get a Lifetime Achievement Award? And then it makes you think of death, okay? Which is probably not what they intended. You get through that, and you come away with a kind of resolve. And that resolve is, well, I really need to buckle down and make sure that I finish what I'm doing now. And then time passes, and all of a sudden the meeting's here, and you want to make remarks to your colleagues and your collaborators, and you want to say something that is meaningful and helpful, but if you can't do that, you will settle for entertaining. So, just have to click on your name. Oh, sorry. So I thought I would do something a little bit different and talk about, my pathway. I decided not to talk about things that you could look up on PubMed. So what I'm going to tell you is sort of my story and my career, and make some points that may resonate with you. This is a career that was born out of conflict. I had a very difficult time deciding whether to pursue science or the humanities. So I tried to do both, English, fine arts, and physics as a start, but no, I could see where that was going. That wasn't going to lead to the balance that I wanted to achieve in my own personal endeavors, and said, maybe the way that you combine the humanities with science is medicine. So I became a pre-med in college. And one of the things that kind of held together my interest has always been writing. So getting through this educational process, which we all do, I enjoyed the aspect of writing it down, writing down things that might lead to better thought. One time Mike Weiner read everything I wrote and invited me to be a discussant in a neuroimaging seminar, and I thought he had the wrong person. I said, Mike, I don't do neuroimaging. And he said, yeah, but I've read all the stuff you wrote, and I want you to comment. So writing can hold things together. So in that process of education, I wanted to be able to learn the academic discipline necessary to do this work, but I was a little bit distracted on the side of the road by something called postmodern theory, which holds that, a lot of the thoughts that we have are shaped by our habits of thought. And the habits of thought, especially in Western cultures, are very essentializing. There's good and bad, right and wrong, beautiful and ugly. Science in particular, goes for some very clear distinctions and reductions. And I was worried that, if I'm doing science and there's this postmodern theory out there, might I be thinking about things in too narrow a way? So I, after my medical training, actually enrolled in a cognitive anthropology graduate program to get a PhD. Now, along the way of getting PhD, I did field work in Thailand. I had 4 kids. I began to see that, every kid, Claire, Robin, Justin, and Aaliyah, two girls and 2 boys, every kid made me stop and think about everything all over again, because each one of them developed a consciousness and a worldview that was different from mine. Working in Thailand with non-literate Karen Hill Tribes people, because I was really worried that because I was literate and because our societies are literate, our thought is shaped in ways that are not natural, and that any type of neuroanatomical correlation that we try to do with language is disrupted by the fact that we're literate. So I was studying this whole field of orality and literacy, went into this jungle world, and, came out thinking, there's a lot of difference in the world, but people are so much more alike than they are different. For example, a mother who watched me all day giving a made-up version of the mini mental state examination in oral Karen. So Karen is a hill tribe language that's never been written down except by missionaries. It's oral. She watched all day, and then she asked me to come and talk to her about her son. And after a little while of sitting with her in her dwelling up on stilts to get out of the mud in the rainy season, her son looked to me like he had trisomy 21. And she asked me, will my son ever be able to take care of himself? So at that time I had one of my 4 kids, and I thought, that's what she wants to know. Some stranger comes out of the jungle, spends all day doing something that everybody found hilarious, asking people to draw intersecting circles and answer questions and put puzzles together. But she thought there was something that I might be able to tell her about the future of her child. And even though I knew you weren't supposed to give answers to things about potential genetic disorders without a karyotype, I went ahead and said, no, I think your son will need somebody to care for him when you're gone. So I get done with this training, and by now I'm on the road to Alzheimer's disease. It was the first thing I was assigned to do. I was still in graduate school. My chairman said, we need someone to start an Alzheimer's clinic and a neurobehavioral unit in the VA hospital. And I thought, okay, sure, why not, It certainly raised a lot of very interesting questions about cognition and the brain in interacting with people with Alzheimer's disease. And it was very apparent in that very early phase that we weren't doing enough for these patients. So as I was in graduate school and starting these programs, the first big clinical trial took place, and this was Tacrin for Alzheimer's disease. At the time, no one believed you could do anything for dementia, and they felt that it was really unethical and probably wrong to even talk to people about it because you would be misleading them. Whereas in residency, dementia patients who were usually assessed as inpatients were completely skipped on rounds. We'd go around as a whole group, residents and medical students and faculty, and we would skip the dementia patients because, number one, they were hard to interact with. Number two, they couldn't really give us any information about their condition. And number three, there wasn't anything we could do for them. So I jumped at the chance to work on this Tacron trial. I was also incredibly energized by the fact that those of you who were there, you remember that there was a lot of momentum generated around Tacron and then the studies that followed. There were collaborations between industry, NIH, the Alzheimer's Association, and academics, lots of academics, lots of heated discussions, and it led to the approval of one drug and then Aricept, which I was fortunate enough to be asked to be the leading investigator for phase 2 and phase 3, subsequent additional cholinesterase inhibitors, and then memantine. So you thought at that time that this was just the beginning of something that was about to take off, and that soon we would have, a whole pharmacopoeia of treatments for Alzheimer's disease. But the thing began to stall. And during the stalling period, what I started to think about a lot was heterogeneity. So even though people are more alike than they are different from each other. The disease seems to be different in some ways. Now we know the biomarkers look a little different in some ways. Could that heterogeneity help us to understand how to target our therapies? And I became involved in policy and in helping different governments with guidelines, community outreach, and on the medical side, in cross-cultural drug development. Then we entered the phase that we're all thinking about now, a lot of negative studies. So all these ideas, lots of negative studies, and then, a tremendous outcry from researchers and from the public about these negative studies, calling them failed trials, despairing, swinging of the pendulum, nothing's going to work. And yet I remembered back to when we were all trying to learn math and how it was different to learn mathematics than it was to learn how to read and write. In math, you try a problem and you don't get it right. You try to solve a problem, okay? There's a solution of some kind. So then you go back and you try again. And you do this multiple times, and it's not until you get it right that you fully understand what you've been doing wrong. So this is part of the process, but it's very hard to sustain the momentum and the investment when that is the case. On this road, I was still resolved that we need more medicines, and not only that, what we were learning in Alzheimer's disease needed to be applied to other diseases as well, in particular Parkinson's disease and Huntington's disease. Moving more toward the present day, I needed to tell stories and to get back to that time at which the pull between the humanities and the sciences was very strong. And one person along the road who'd done that quite well for a long time was Oliver Sacks. When I was in medical school, or just after I finished, he published The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat. And I read that book at the time, and I thought, okay, he's got the best of everything. He's doing the neurology, he's doing the writing. But when I read the book, I was really mad, because he seemed to make up the neurobehavioral correlations in order to explain the case, instead of using what we knew about the brain, already. And so for a while, I put down his books, then I picked them up and read them all those years along the way. Recently, a couple of years ago, I saw a review of Oliver Sacks' memoir in the New York Review of Books. Just a fascinating 360 view of somebody that I had met a couple of times, But I had no idea what his life had really been like. And I really recommend this book to everybody. And I thought, well, you know, his contribution is huge. And then very shortly after that, there was a piece by Oliver Sacks in the New York Review of Books about his terminal cancer, which turned out to be the second or third encounter he'd had with cancer, life-threatening cancer. But this time he made it very clear from the essay that he was not going to survive. So I'd met Oliver Sacks a couple of times and, you know, had professional exchanges. He would be up here at the podium with a stack of papers, maybe 50 pages, reading them in what appeared to be random order, sometimes dropping them on the floor. And we talked, you know, a few times about what he did, and I wondered, how did he get anything done? He writes all of these incredible, professional, consummate books, and I'd ask him, well, how do you see patients, and how do you do your academic work? And he said, well, you know, he might spend 3 days with a patient, which is a luxury that he knew not everybody had. So when I read his piece about terminal cancer, I decided to write him a letter. And I wrote him a letter, and I wanted to say not only how important he was to the field and to people's understanding of neurology and the brain and diseases of the brain, but to me, as somebody who needed writing as part of my work. A little while passed, and he wrote back. And I was surprised that he knew who I was, and he said some very encouraging things. And he ended his letter by saying, I'm going to continue to write for as long as I can. And this was, in my memory, about 10 days before he died. So Oliver Sacks was an inspiration to me that we keep trying to do that thing that we do until we die. It was mentioned that I recently took a little bit of a divergent path, at least in some people's mind, in order to change my operating system. My operating system is now one of industry and not academia. I did this because I needed more momentum. I am privileged to work in a place that has incredible scientists of all types across every kind of function that is relevant to drug development. And they're all in the same place or reachable by a teleconference. I've been given a lot of responsibility and also a lot of support. When I look back on this whole story, which is maybe not your typical acceptance speech, why am I telling you this? Well, you all have your story. You have your road, and you have your things that are off the road, okay? But the things that are off the road are just as important to shaping who you are and how you do your work as the things on the road. I am convinced that together, with our on-the-road and off-the-road efforts, we are going to succeed in doing what is needed for Alzheimer's patients. Thank you.